And welcome to this webinar. My name is Owen Gagare, and I'm doing advocacy for Interwatch. And Interwatch is an organization domiciled in Africa, dedicated to research, policy work, and advocacy to strengthen public oversight of state and private intelligence agencies in Africa. And some colleagues here will know that we've got an interest in a number of issues, and we've also been working around working with the media to capacitate, to train, and so forth on issues around surveillance, around digital safety, around physical safety, and so forth. Um, Let me just give you a brief background to this webinar that we are having today. Interwatch last year contracted researchers and journalists in Southern Africa to basically look at the threats, to research on the threats that journalists and media organizations are facing in each of in 7 countries, including Namibia. And in this case, Dr. Phillip Santos and Frederico Links, a prominent journalist in Namibia, were tasked with doing research on Namibia, and they came up with a report which basically looked at the threats that are there in Namibia. Similar reports were produced in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Botswana, Eswatini, and Lesotho. And we've held webinars in each of those countries, basically looking at those threats. But we've in each of those countries, we've gone beyond just looking at the threats to look at maybe areas for collaboration, areas for possible advocacy, and also when we're looking at the threats, just looking at each of these countries to say which are the major threats in each of these countries. For example, you find that we find that the media landscape is diverse. Some threats are the same, e.g., the economic threats. Legacy media throughout the region is struggling struggling to get resources, the economies and so forth, and the digital shift, the audience shift to digital spaces has affected basically the entire region and perhaps the continent and so forth. But we also had several countries where it's brutal to operate for journalists. Mozambique, for example, journalists are being killed. That was the same with Lesotho. In Zimbabwe, we have journalists in exile. Others are being arrested and so forth, merely for practicing journalism. In South Africa, for example, one of the major issues was SLAPS, the lawsuits to prevent journalism and so forth. We went to Botswana. There's increased surveillance of journalists and so forth. So you find that the threats differ. Some are the same, but they differ from with each and every single country. But today we're discussing Namibia, and we've got the co-author of the report, Phillip Santos, who is going to share with us. We also have quite a number of panelists amongst us. We have Shelleygan Petersen. She's the president of the Namibia Media Professionals Union. And I would want to welcome you, Shelley, and thanks so much for agreeing to be part of this panel. Well, Shelley, I met her some time ago in Namibia, and she was a good host. Took us to this place where they serve some of the best beef that I've eaten. Thank you so much, Shelley. We also have Zoe Titus. Zoe is a veteran. She has done a lot of advocacy around issues to do with press freedom, media freedom, and so forth. And we're very keen to hear from her on the threats that are affecting Namibia and possibly the way out, because we always want to look for a way out. We also have the chairperson of the Editors Forum, Toivo, Ndjebela. Toivo, thanks so much for being with us and for your assistance as we were preparing for this webinar. We are really looking forward to hearing from you as editors about the problems the challenges that are facing the Namibian media, and also the solutions and maybe areas for possible cooperation in advocacy, in training, and so forth. We have my sister Esther Mbathera. I had a long chat with her today, and I'm pleased that she seemed to know Zimbabwe very well, having visited a lot of places around Harare where I'm based. So Esther, welcome to this webinar where we're keen to hear from you. There are so many issues that to talk about as an investigative journalist yourself, and also as a woman in the media, because Dr. Santos, in his report, identified specific threats that are prevalent among women and so forth. So we want to address those as well. And I just want to welcome everyone to this webinar. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. And I'll start with maybe to kick us off. I'll ask Dr. Santos to introduce himself and maybe present his findings. After presenting his findings, we'll then open the floor to I'll moderate, but colleagues, everyone here is free to contribute. If you've got a question, you can raise your hand, or you can just write a message if you want me to read it out. But Dr. Santos, may you please introduce yourself and then also share your findings. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Owen, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar. I must
sorry,
first
Dr. Santos,
maybe
if it helps.
Yeah.
You're tilted. I don't know, maybe it's me only.
Oh,
If you can
I'm on the
adjust, yeah.
phone. Yeah, I'm using the phone.
Now this is better.
Now it's fine. It's fine now.
Okay. All right. Let me find a way of placing the phone so that it doesn't fall off. I only have the link to this webinar on the phone, which is why I joined using the phone. Okay, so the way I ended up participating in the writing of this report is that Frederico, who was the original author of the report, got very busy and approached me to see if I couldn't finish working on the report that he had already started. If those of you have gone through the report, you would see that there is a very robust discussion of laws in particular that seem to present potential threats now and in the future to the media in Namibia. Those sections were written by Frederico, which is evident, I think, in the detail that you see in those particular sections, because Frederico himself has done a lot of work in terms of analyzing the legal framework in Namibia around policy issues, the way the legal framework affects the operations of the media, and many other aspects of policy making in Namibia. I must also probably say something that almost everyone who does something on Namibia is first hit with when you're asked to write such a report about threats to the media in a country that often is ranked as either number one or number two in terms of media freedom on the continent, and also still ranks very highly globally on the one hand, and on the other, Namibia ranks as the 8th best country in terms of closing the gender gap. So I mean, the first instinct is to actually think about whether or not there are any threats, like what threats could there be in such a context. And that is what also hit me first. But after reading Frederico's analysis of the legal framework in Namibia and how it can potentially present challenges for the media in the country, and I thought, oh, maybe there is more to this. We need to take a closer look at some of the things that we probably take for granted. But I think, to its credit, Namibia still does rank very highly in every aspect of guaranteeing basic freedoms that are necessary in a democracy, which makes Namibia a functional constitutional democracy. And this has been acknowledged by many international entities, Reporters Without Borders being among them, even Freedom House, which is the other. I mean, if you go to their analysis of the situation in Namibia, it's always very positive, and rightly so, because so much positive stuff is recognizable and evident in Namibia in terms of creating an enabling environment for journalism. Comparatively speaking, it's actually much better than the experiences of most journalists on the continent than it sounds, especially when one is presenting a report of this nature where the focus is on the negatives. The positives tend to sort of be understated under those circumstances. So I am just giving this as a qualifying preface to the threats that I'm going to refer to, which are highlighted in the report. Some of the threats, as you have already indicated, Owen, are standard. They are not really unique to Namibia. They are faced by the media globally, and more so on the African continent. Then there are those that are unique to the country, which obviously can be confronted through local activism, advocacy, and also even in terms of the policymakers themselves, reflecting on some of the laws and policies which can still be improved and create an even better working environment for journalists and media organizations in the country. But I'll highlight I think about 5 threats that the report refers to. So the first one are mainly legal frameworks that seem to have provisions that can potentially present a threat to the media. I must also indicate, and I've written this in other similar reports elsewhere, that the real threats, the actualization of some of these threats is dependent on the political environment in the context within which such media operate. So a more enabling political environment, a more democratic political environment may choose not to use some of these instruments that are available to them to constrict the media space and limit the operations of journalism. But again, an equally enabling political system may choose not to use those instruments. And this has largely been the case with Namibia, that even if some of these instruments are available or at the disposal of the state, they haven't been significant. I know there would be disagreements around this point. It may be controversial, but I think there hasn't been deliberate targeting of journalists using legal instruments in a way that would render the media functionally sort of incompetent. Although they are available, they are there. I mean, like the defamation law is there, and it has criminal sort of elements to it that can potentially create a significant chilling environment for journalists, but its application has also been very minimal, which sort of enables journalists to continue doing their work with little worry about what that law is likely to do. But I think it's also significant to mention that its very presence presents a chilling environment. Journalists can also self-censor, considering what can happen to them because of such a law. And also, if the political environment changes and it gets worse than the one that's currently there, it can be deliberately deployed to actually limit the operation of journalists freely. But there are many other laws that present the same potential. And the ones that are highlighted in the report are mainly to do with the surveillance framework, which is sort of constituted by quite a number, I think at least 5 laws that are highlighted in there, which have provisions that can, in one way or the other, limit the free operation of the media, or at least just create a chilling environment, which is already bad enough. Because the moment journalists are afraid to report on certain issues, to criticize certain people or criticize certain institutions, that already minimizes the potential of such media to play a significant normative role in enhancing the democratic space that is already there. In fact, it may lead to the opposite, which is to undermine that very democracy, which is already there. Then the second major threat is presented by political and institutional threats. And again, these present more or less the same kind of impact that a negative legislative framework presents, which is that even if political institutions or political actors don't actively threaten journalists, like overtly threaten journalists, as would be the case in some contexts, the potential for such things happening does present a challenge for journalists. And in Namibia, I think this is manifested more in relation to state media, which are obviously by their ownership structure are vulnerable to political influence, if not outright control. Because state media are generally funded through the state. And here there are 3 major state media which play a very key role in the Namibian public communication space, the NBC, NAMPA, and New Era. These are very key media. And to the degree that in one way or the other, they subject their reportage to the tutelage of the state, that limits their potential to really play a significant normative role in terms of enhancing the democratic operations of the media. So that is one significant weakness, obviously, and this applies in most African countries to the point that there are debates about whether such media are public or state media. And to the extent that they gravitate towards being state media, they do end up serving the remit of the state rather than that of the public. And it is even more dangerous if the state is controlled by a handful of people with vested interests and who can subject these media to their whims. This may not be the case as we speak right now, but it definitely is a threat. And if political conditions enable it, they may end up playing such a role, which sort of makes them mostly instruments of propaganda than news media in the normative sense. There are also potential institutional limitations to the operation of the media, and these are manifested in 2 major ways. One is through regulatory frameworks, and in Namibia, I think there are three probably major regulators, which have a consequential impact on the media. The first one is CRAN. CRAN is largely lauded as a significantly independent body, very enabling in its operations. I think the good thing with the webinar is that if there's someone who disagrees with his opinion, they can always make their argument. But I think there is broad recognition that CRAN is largely operated as a transparent, effective, and professional independent body, which in itself is a very, very good thing for the country. The second one is the NBC, which operates both as an operator, as a media entity that regulates itself. But of course, regulates itself assumes that there is no extra institutional control on it, which may not be the case. But that also presents a bit of a challenge, especially if the regulatory dynamics are not as transparent as one would want them to be. Then the last one is through the EFN, which was the media ombudsman in Namibia. This has also largely been a very open and professional platform through which disagreements about media content are negotiated between newsmakers, and also newsmakers being the people that are reported about, and then media entities that produce the news. So it's quite a very good arrangement in itself, but it also has major weaknesses, which is one of which is funding, because it is not a significantly funded structure within the media ecology of the country. And that can limit its ability to regulate the quality of journalism in the country, and also may even create conditions that allow journalists to be bullied, threatened, or even for them to self-censor to avoid situations when they are either, I mean, to use Norman Chomsky's term, because it's sort of attacked through flack, which is where cases may be, litigation may be used against media to bankrupt them. So you just need to take a media to court and exhaust their resources through protracted court cases until they are bankrupt and they simply close shop, or at least that limits their operations and ability to provide critical journalism. That on its own is already a very bad potential threat to the media. So I think in that regard, the question of resources is very important with regards to this self-regulatory framework within the media ecology of the country. But also with regards to that, there are other potential concerns around some laws like the Cybercrime Bill, which is also noted for potentially threatening not just journalists, but also their audiences by creating a chilling effect as it seeks to have some degree of control over social media usage and so on. Right. Then the third threat, which has a double sort of character to it. The first one is that of technological innovations being sources of threats to the media, and the resultant effect, which is the shrinking of revenue. So these two are not really unique to the country. I think they are manifested as much in the developed world as they are in the developing world. But their net effect is that traditional or legacy media, which are the major source of verified information and news, and which are the most reliable platforms of communication and discussion, especially during election periods, are severely undermined by shrinking revenue. the resultant effect of shrinking revenue is very consequential, because it means that the media cannot retain experienced journalists who obviously demand more in terms of salary, and who may end up leaving journalism as a profession to join other related professions with better remuneration. So that is one potential threat there. The second one is the quality of journalism itself, because important stories, especially of an investigative nature, require resources. They require a great deal of resources, which is why, for instance, the Fishrot case, which the Namibian, to give it credit, had been doing some work on, was significantly one could say broken by Al Jazeera, because of the resources, the capacity that they have to trace a particular story across regions all over the world, Africa, Europe, Asia, and so on. Now, when you are talking about local media, the capacity to do that is obviously very limited, and it becomes even more limited when revenue streams shrink and are narrowed down significantly, as is the case with this shift of audiences from legacy media to online spaces, where the generation of such revenue is also very limited. Then the third impact of technology, again, is the juniorization of the newsroom, which in Namibia is now a generally accepted reality, that newsrooms are largely dependent on students who are interning because of this inability to pay experienced journalists to do their work. So students who go on internship are thrown in the deep end, which is good for them because they learn fast, but they don't have the stamina to produce the quality of journalism that a typically experienced journalist would be able to. Then the fourth, I don't know if it is the fourth or fifth threat, is misogynism, or these threats against female journalists generally. And these exist at two levels. The first level is obviously social, the societal level, which is sort of public attitudes towards female journalists when they express themselves on social media and other such platforms. They generally receive a great deal of criticism in comparison to their male counterparts. It has also been established. In fact, I supervised a student who did a study on the experiences of female journalists in Namibian newsrooms. And one of the things that came out of that research is that even news sources, the newsmakers themselves, tend to threaten female journalists if they are working on a story that seems to encroach on their privileges, or in some cases they demand sexual favors and so on and so on. These are the kinds of experiences that a male journalist wouldn't encounter on a daily basis. Then the third one is that the newsroom itself is a very structured, a gendered environment in which female journalists again encounter all kinds of limitations that also make it difficult for them to operate optimally, or at least above average in terms of what they could deliver under ordinary circumstances. So this limits their ability to report issues completely and freely. So in sum, to allow time for engagement with these issues, because I know some of them may be contentious and people may hold different opinions about them. I think I will end there, but the report itself goes further to discuss the implications of this, which I've touched on a bit in this presentation, and also proposes some potential interventions, especially in terms of policy making and so on and so on. But let me end there, Owen, and allow more time for engagement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my brother. You can tell he's a university lecturer. He's very thorough and basically presented and summarized the report in a very good way. Even if you've not read the report, one can have a pretty good idea what is contained in the report. Thank you so much, and thank you for such a wonderful report. And I saw amongst the audience Estacio Valoy from Mozambique. You will be surprised that such an environment exists because very recently, the police swooped on him, took away his gadgets, phones, camera, laptops, and so forth. So that's the harsh environment that colleagues in the region are facing elsewhere. So it's very pleasant when we hear that in Namibia, the environment is not as tough as other places in the region, but nonetheless, the report identifies potential threats which need to be nipped in the bud before they blossom. There are potential threats. There are areas. There are laws. There are some bad laws that should one day someone who's power hungry or a dictator come into power, those laws can, for example, be weaponized against journalists, weaponized against the media. So we want to discuss about those as well and what can be done to consolidate the gains that are there in Namibia. Thank you so much. So in the interest of time, I will ask Shelley to come in and just keep us, maybe sorry before I go to Shelley, I just Dr. Santos, has anything materially changed since this report was published? Has anything, these threats moved? Because it talks about some proposed laws such as the cyber crime bill, for example. Is it now an act and so forth? Are there any material
No,
changes before we ask Shelley?
no, that one is not yet an act. But I think the most significant development, and colleagues can chip in on this, is that because the Access to Information Act, which is a very significant law in Namibia, Namibia was already an environment in which access to information was not significantly difficult. But this law, to add to that environment, this law was going to even enhance that particular environment to a degree that is not matched on the continent. But I think the most significant development is that the regulations which are I don't know if it is the regulation, which are supposed to operationalize the law have not been put in place as yet, and there was a process of recruiting the information commissioner who is supposed to now be the custodian of this process of managing access to information. That process has also been put on hold, and it's not clear why. But that's also a very significant development, I think, and it raised a bit of concern in the media fraternity, and there were demands for explanation. I remember one editor did make sort of a pointed criticism of that halt in this particular process. So I think that is a major development. But I can't think of any other significant worsening of the situation than that. Although we can hear from the journalists themselves who are in the field and are confronted with different kinds of limitations and restrictions in their operations. Thank you, Owen.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you, Shelley, for joining us. I know you've got a tight deadline, and you'll be off within an hour or so. But before you go, can we give you an opportunity to speak about the threats and what you think about the reports? And since you are going, just also speak about the possible solutions, what can be done. Shelley is the president of the Namibia Media Professionals Union. Shelley, over to you.
Thank you very much, Owen. I think the most important matter for me is how the threats, especially when it comes to the threats towards the newsrooms and the economic threats around the media industry, and how it impacts our members and how it impacts media professionals, right? As the revenue, there's a lot of challenges towards that. But I think one of the most important things that we must recognize is that since the development or since the technological innovations have come on board, we as an industry has not sat and we have not been able to really find our own place and create our own boundaries towards it. And I'll be more specific. I mean, when social media came on board, uh, everyone started joining social media, and what that meant was we're giving out information for free as opposed to via the newspaper as we know it. And I think we haven't found ourselves till today as a result of giving out our news for free. It has deeply challenged how a newspaper is being bought, how stories are being paid for, um, and that's concerning because it threatens the jobs of our members. It threatens the jobs. So I think at the end of the day, I believe as a industry at some point, including from the journalists to the marketing staff within media organizations to the media leaders, we need to come together and together get a solution on how we can better the circumstances that we're in. The other day, I was talking to Federico, for instance, about TikTok journalism, and the conversation around it was that around the globe there are media houses who are staying away from TikTok, and because of not just the lack of revenue that comes from sharing stories on these platforms, but also there needs to be a boundary as to these big tech companies having or getting using media content to run their platforms, and in no way media houses are compensating for it, and placing that stress on media houses, leading to poor working conditions for journalists. I mean, even before social no it is actually with the internet that you saw wages go down for journalists, working conditions getting worse, are trying to meet this demand of being a multimedia journalist, which is where we are going, and it's inevitable. Every journalist should be able to be a multimedia journalist, but we shouldn't let that lower the principles and the standards of journalists, because it opens them up to other threats. When you are lower paid, um, you have a lot of journalists who's not a lot. You have journalists who's able to compromise the industry, compromise their principles to be able to feed themselves. We have seen that in our industry as well. As it's very hush hush, and it's a lot of murmur in the industry, but it's in fact there that journalists would, and we see also with the juniorization of it, journalists leaving the industry, leaving with their knowledge and experience built up over 8 years, built up over 15 years, that we are losing to it, and that impacts the quality of journalism. Because as Prof. Santos said, you don't have when you have a junior newsroom, what that means is you have a newsroom that has missed out on the past 10 years, and the nuances and the semantics that weren't added into stories is that knowledge that you have. Within journalism, as we know, it's a lot of knowledge and experience that make in-depth stories and investigative journalism what it is. It brings its in-depth compared to a daily news. Um, Also, with the threat to state media, we have seen, especially this year, we have seen a number of meetings that the minister has with the state media organizations, and it happens quite frequently. It's almost a quarterly meeting, which is really, really concerning, because in those meetings it's not just the board members, but it's the news editors that's in those meetings. It's the editors involved with the day-to-day journalism, which is so concerning, because they just say, "Oh, this is a courtesy visit," and I've probably seen like 5 courtesy visits with the same minister from the same state media and organization. It really raises a lot of flags. Sorry. Yeah. And coming back to the training and the quality of journalism. I'm so sorry, I'm losing my voice. Okay, I'm back. For what the union has been trying to do to sort of better journalists and to make them understand how challenging the industry is, we are embarking on a process of mentorship where we link our members with each other. So having more senior journalists mentor younger journalists, taking each other hand by hand to better journalism at the end of the day, because it is all of our responsibility to better it. We are also going into, and that speaks to what women journalists go through. I mean, in the industry, we've had such great developments in terms of media leadership. We have a director general of the NBC state media organization, which is a woman. We have women news editors, women media managers. For the first time in Namibia, you see a lot of women in positions of
Shelleygan, we are really struggling to hear you.
Hi, Shelley. I think we're having a problem with Shelley's connection, but the union is doing quite a lot of work to capacitate journalists, mentorship. She's also speaking about the environment that, unlike in many other places in SADC, in Namibia, there are a lot of women in leadership positions, even in the newsrooms and so forth. She is also the president, eh? She's a whole president of the union. So this must be applauded. So this must be applauded. I beg, or can we continue?
Hi, I hope you can hear me now better. Yeah.
Yes, Shelley, we can hear you.
Perfect. So we are also going to embark on the process of doing check-in Fridays. We will have mental health discussions with journalists, or where they can just debrief and vent about what they're going through, and we counsel each other and give each other better coping mechanisms to work with. And I think through these two mechanisms, we are able to tackle 2 of the threats that was identified in this. And in this report is identifying that, ensuring that female journalists are equipped enough to handle the mistreatment that they're getting, but also when they check in Fridays, we are able to develop some sort of have conversations, a starting point to have conversations with media owners, to bring awareness to this mental health matter, because it's really significant. We have lost too many journalists, either out of the industry, or we've lost them to addiction or to some sort of and there's very little research on, especially like losing talent out of the industry. So yeah, and training, we're also embarking with, we had recently, as I said, a discussion with NBC where they have also come on board to say that they will assist us with having more training around artificial intelligence, mental health, and the last was labor migration. So yeah, we are trying to connect the industry a bit more. One thing that Dr. Santos mentioned was that journalists, the threats can lead to a point where journalists will self-censor themselves. There was a report that came out earlier this year that proved exactly that point. that journalists are self-censoring. More than citizens. Citizens are speaking out. That's the African Media Barometer for Namibia 2026. That speaks to exactly that point, and that is very scary. As a journalist myself, that we need to remedy it before it really gets worse to a point where we will just have um, PR pieces in newspapers more than very good investigative stories into politics, governance, and I mean all the different sectors of our countries.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shelley. And I'm happy that the union is aware of what is going on, the threats that are there, the challenges that are there, and that you are taking practical action to find remedies around those issues. I have a question here from Brenna, who says, are there any serious cases of state surveillance on the country's media practitioners that have been reported in the recent past? Have there been any cases of state surveillance? And maybe before that question is answered, any of the panelists can take that one. The report does mention that surveillance is a threat. And one of those that were mentioned was the proposed cybercrime bill. Then there's also legislation like the Criminal Procedure Act, the Police Act, the Namibia Central Intelligence Services Act, the Defense Act, and the Communications Act. The Communications Act, for example, allows the interception of communication and so forth. Then the Prevention of Combating of Terrorist and Proliferation Activities Act, and so forth. So there is legislation that can be used for surveillance or to snoop into the communications of journalists and their sources. How big is it? A big problem? Have there been any cases around those issues? Maybe the editors the editors or Zoe, who has done a lot of advocacy around media freedom and so forth. You could maybe help us there.
May I, Owen?
Yes, please go ahead.
Zoe here. And firstly, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to have a very, very, a much needed discussion on these important issues. I want to respond to Brenna's question, but I want to systematically approach this. And I firstly want to look at the Intel Watch report. And then at the same time, I have to make reference to the African Media Barometer, which we launched on the 4th of June this year. And I think the important thing about these two reports, the Intel Watch report and the African Media Barometer report, is that I think fundamental baseline finding is actually in sync. The fact that Namibia is a relatively free environment where we are not faced with daily harassment, arbitrary arrest of journalists, etc. Our problem is a structural one, and if left unchecked, it can, over time, develop into a really serious, much more serious problem, especially if we were in a more authoritarian environment. But let me go back initially to the Intel Watch report. I think that the report, at least my reading of the report, is that it identifies important pressure points. Its strength lies in bringing together, Professor Santos mentioned 5, bringing together the legal, the political, the economic, technological, and gender threats within one framework. I broadly agree with its diagnosis. Where I would add nuance is in distinguishing between powers that are capable of abuse and evidence of systematic abuse. And this leads to Brenna's question. Namibia, as I said, not characterized by routine imprisonment, violence, or censorship. The concern is the accumulation of these structural vulnerabilities that your report and our AMB have identified. So I think that the Intel Watch report is really, really useful as a risk mapping tool that would deepen the evidence base for the work that needs to be done in this space. In terms of the most serious threats facing journalism, I would probably schedule them slightly differently. First, I would group them in 3 areas. The first being the legal and the institutional vulnerability, including surveillance, weak source protection, unresolved restrictive laws. And then secondly, what I'm probably amplifying here is the economic sustainability, which includes the newsroom contraction, the poor remuneration, and one that we are not discussing in the manner that we should be, the issue of ownership concentration, and then declining advertising income. And then thirdly, dealing with issues of the institutional independence, particularly within state-owned media, and Professor Santos spoke about that at length. The real concern, I think, is how these pressures interact. Now, I want to touch on the surveillance issue. Is surveillance a genuinely media freedom issue? Is it something that should concern us? Yes, yes. But again, that I think needs very precise framing. The issue of SIM registration alone does not prove surveillance of journalists. The concern is the combination of mandatory identification, prolonged data retention, the issue of interception powers, and the weak oversight and the absence of the comprehensive data protection law, which we've been advocating for a long period. So what is the actual concern with SIM registration? The concern is not registration, I think, as an administrative act. The concern is about what happens when identity-linked communication sits within a surveillance framework without the adequate safeguards. For journalists, more specifically, confidential source relationships become a critical issue because it becomes more vulnerable both to journalists and sources who know that communications are potentially traceable. So that, I hope, responds to Brenna's question. We have not had overt arrests of journalists or issues of surveillance, but that threat is there. It has not played out in real terms. What we should look at is the extent to which we need to revise our policies and ensure greater protection for journalists.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for your contribution. Well presented, and I think it points to what the professor said, that in as much as the threats have not been exercised, the potential is there, and there is need perhaps for stakeholders, the media, editors, media CSOs to come together and find solutions. And also, there's this big issue. There's the big issue around the economic threats with shrinking revenue and so forth. What needs to be done around those issues? Okay. Let me invite an editor, the chairperson of the Editors Forum, to also to contribute to this discussion. And if we may also have your assessment of the threats. What are the number one threats in Namibia and what needs to be done? Toivo?
Yes, thank you very much, Owen, and thank you to everybody who has made time to be with us. I want to acknowledge from the onset the presence also online of Dr. Sadrach Shiomeka, who is the media ombudsman in Namibia, and through whose office complaints against the media, especially by members of the public, including institutions, are channeled. So I thought Owen may not know that the ombudsman is online, so I needed to just acknowledge his presence. Look, the report captures very well what we in the industry encounter from time to time, or what we fear. Not very much encounter, but what we fear. I mean, Zoe spoke about the existence of threats, even those that did not fully manifest into reality. I think, and I know there's somebody who put up a question about government revenues there. So I'll try maybe also to include that. So I think the main issue at the moment is the economic threat to the media, with the evolving models of business and the advancement of technology, and the fact that even advertisers today have their platforms, their own platforms. If a company is advertising vacancies, it can just do so on its own platforms these days, as opposed to the olden days when they would have to put it in the newspaper and the newspaper survives on that. And the danger with that is not very much the profit, but the independence, the threat to the press independence that it comes with. We know, for example, that we as editors, our position is very clear. We recently, just 2 weeks ago, we held an indaba for the industry where we invited media executives and editors under the same roof to discuss at length the issue of sustainability. And we were assisted by Professor Guy Berger from South Africa, previously a UNESCO director, and who really gave us some beautiful insights about where we are and what can be done to fend off the threats. Now, for the state, state advertising in particular, in Namibia, it remains skewed. Government, by its very nature and its very size, is probably the biggest advertiser in the country. It's also the biggest source of information because it comes from all ministries having a thing or two to say about anything. So they are the biggest disposers of both information and advertisement. But our position is that state advertising must not become a reward for friendly coverage. And sometimes you get a sense that we are slowly tilting into that direction where even privately owned media houses somehow start to be friendlier and less critical for fear of losing advertisement whenever it comes. And I mean, you also see from time to time, low-key threats from state actors somehow suggesting that they will withdraw advertising as a punishment for critical reporting. It's not a pronounced thing, it's not official, but you get a sense from time to time in your interactions that there are fillers being sent out there to say, behave yourself or we are going to cut the taps. So allocation should be transparent, of course, the allocations of advertisement. But I mean, because sometimes you are targeting a particular audience and only a particular media house actually delivers or ventures into that audience, we can understand that. But it must be based on legitimate criteria, not because newspaper A or B exposed a thing or two that happened in the within the state structures. So media houses should not have to choose really. They shouldn't have to choose between editorial independence or commercial survival. And that's why sustainability is key. I mean, Shelleygan alluded to it briefly there to say that if a media house is struggling to pay salaries and attend to its operational expenditures, its basic expenditures, it might be tempted to succumb to some of these pressures and start losing its independence along the way. So, in not so many words, I'll end there for now.
Thank you so much, Toivo, and thank you also for alerting me to the presence of to the ombudsman's presence. I was not aware. You are welcome, and we're keen to hear from you your thoughts around this report and also the threats that have been identified and also the possible solutions. Yeah, and we have some questions here and also some comments. Mapula is asking. He says, "Hello, Owen and everyone. The media in South Africa is reported to be currently experiencing major job losses. Big news organizations like ENCA and Media 24 are reported to have announced widespread retrenchments and restructuring. Are job losses currently a threat in the Namibian space?" Maybe the editors can take that one. Esther, well, I'm keen to hear from you. Maybe you can help us with that question. And also, you being an investigative journalist, we've heard about specific threats that women face. How have you managed to thrive as an investigative journalist in Namibia? Then there's also this one, a question from Gallant. I think, Toivo, you've looked at that one, you've answered. To what extent does government advertising spending or lack thereof in independent media act as a throttle on the revenue streams, thereby indirectly starts the work of journalists? Then we also have a brother who joined us from Malawi. His name is Grigori Gondwe. We didn't do such a report in Malawi, but he's asking us to commission such a report because there are various threats that the Malawian media is facing that should also be in the public domain and so forth. We're going to consider that Grigory will talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Esther, Can you go ahead? And after that, there's a hand from Paheja Siririka. I hope I pronounced it well. Can you fire your question when she's through? Thank you.
Yeah. All right. From my side as being an investigative journalist, maybe because of my age, I have some respect, and so I really not have gone through any threats. But this year we had a threat that was made towards one of the journalists from my newsroom, and it is also recorded in the report. Tracy Taverinika, who wrote an article about a minister, and then this minister basically, not a physical threat, but however, he has alluded to some issues like he's going to deal with her and all of that. And as a result, for a whole week, she was being threatened with messages via SMS and WhatsApp and so on. By people who are basically just saying, look, you are a Zimbabwean, you don't belong here, we are going to deal with you and all of these things. But thankfully we had some intervention from international partners that basically also just came in to assist her, because mentally it was taking a toll on her. From the workplace, we had to give her time off, but also we had to give her support throughout. I had to check on her on a daily basis and how she was doing and so on. And at work, we then also arranged for her to attend some counseling sessions and so on. She's still going through that. She's still fearing that maybe her next story, because now this whole thing had the impact on her that for every story that she's now doing, she's really carefully thinking about her future, because she's also just a young mother at the same time with her two young toddlers. So it's quite taxing. Now, generally, because currently investigative journalism is also one of the aspects that's suffering, reporting that is suffering in the country, because we don't have the courageous journalists anymore to do this. Most of them have gone into academia. Some of them have taken up full-time jobs elsewhere and so on. Basically, the juniorization of newsrooms, that is the toll that is taking on the newsrooms. So we have, so with all the young people that are coming in, some of them are not really keen on taking on investigative issues. They want to deal with basic issues like your community events or community reporting, dealing with educational reporting, because education is quite taking up a lot of issues, because now we have a lot of interest in reporting on education. There's also interest in reporting on gender issues, little bit of environment, but when it comes to investigations, really very little from the young people coming out of universities. Yeah, the other thing I just wanted to allude to the fact around advertisement from the state of this. Toivo has spoken about it, but I also just wanted to add a voice there. To be honest, we are going through a lot in Namibia when it comes to support from our governments, from our government especially. It's generally, we have last week, we just had a minister again saying, besides the advertising, it's also just for them to respond to issues. Last week, we had this a deputy minister who literally just said publicly and said, we are not going to speak to the Namibian until they apologize to me on a story that was written, and he had never come back and refute the facts in the article, but he just decided, look, he's not going to speak to the Namibian at all. And this time around, he publicly said it again. And those are the things that now it impacts on service delivery. Because if we now have to ask a question around education, because he's a Deputy Minister of Education, Youth and Sports and Culture, and if we have to report on those issues, we are forced to either just always ask the minister and never ask him any question, even though he's also often tasked by his leader that he sometimes have to attend to issues in the communities and so on. But the moment that the Namibian is going to be there, is he going to say no? He will not answer a question from the Namibian. Yeah.
Thank you, Esther. Those are all threats when public officials publicly declare that they are not going to speak to certain journalists or certain media houses, it can build impunity. It starts with one, then it's two, it multiplies, and at the end, we have a whole government refusing to speak to journalists as and when they want. I'll ask Paheja to ask. Then Herbert also has a hand up. Herbert, after Paheja speaks, are you able to quickly fire your question? And as she was speaking, as Esther was speaking, I realized that Tracy is also amongst the audience. Tracy, if you are able to speak, if you want to share your story and how it affected you as a journalist, as a mother, just let me know so that we give you an opportunity. Thank you so much. So Paheja, then Herbert.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Owen. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great stuff. My input or comment, followed by a question, is based on what Dr. Santos said regarding the Right to Information Act, where he alluded to the fact that for the longest time, there hasn't been really a need to compel institutions to answer media queries, but that has become a little bit of a problem nowadays. Because right now, Namibian journalists and even civil society, as well as ordinary citizens, they've had no statutory right to demand records from public bodies or even from government. We rely heavily on, leaked documents and something that people call official goodwill, or just the informal relationships that us journalists have established with certain individuals or entities. So this Access to Information Act would legally compel institutions and people or individuals to respond to our queries, especially those that are of public interest. So if probably Madam Titus is around, or even my senior, Mr. Ndjebela, is around, the Windhoek Declaration gave the World Press Freedom Day. So why does a country that hosted this very monumental event that is still celebrated right now leave journalists without a working access to information law more than 3 decades later? And I think a follow-up to that would be, what leverage does the media sector actually have when it comes to enforcing this very great implementation, or much needed implementation? Because whether we like it or not, institutions need to answer to questions, especially those that are of public interest. Thank you.
May I, Owen? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Zoe.
Oh, thanks, Esther. Just to deal with the access to information issue very, very briefly. I think the biggest lesson for us as policy advocates is that the adoption or gazetting of a law is not the final process in the advocacy, let's say, advocacy cycle. We actually need to move further to ensure that implementation is guaranteed. At this point in time, when it comes to the Access to Information Act in Namibia, I think it's a matter of political will. There are certainly people who would rather see that act never see the light of day. So as a country, not as the media sector alone, because remember, this law has specific benefits for the media in terms of doing its work. Also, if you read the law, it's not going to help you with your day-to-day reporting. It is largely going to assist those who are doing long-term investigative journalism and who would probably have the capacity to deal with several rounds of that information not being made accessible. So for us as citizens of the country, we need to exert pressure. And this is where a movement around the right to access to information must be built. And I hope that journalists would start reigniting that discussion again. But may I also take the, Esther, you wanted to say something on the same?
No, go ahead.
There is a question, Owen, in the chat that talks about the issue of job losses and media viability. I just wanted to respond to that very, very briefly. I think increasingly we need to put the issue of economic viability and sustainability on the media freedom agenda and explore, especially in the case of Namibia, the clarity or let's say transparency with which government advertising is allocated. The reason for this is, because a newsroom does not need to be censored by a government to lose editorial independence. Poor salaries, shrinking staffing, loss of experienced journalists, and independence on a narrow advertising market. These influence which stories are pursued and how strongly editors can, an emphasis on can, defend them, especially when there is economic fragility. So this then becomes a media freedom issue and something that we should collectively take into consideration. On the role, again, on state advertising, I think it becomes a media freedom concern where, as I said earlier, that allocation is not done in a clear, open manner where it can potentially be linked to editorial favorability. So even without that explicit coercion, dependence on government advertising creates that vulnerability. We have to keep in mind that our government-funded media or government media is the biggest media in a very, very small market. There have been, I think, overall, and I think around 34% reduction on advertising year on year. So now consider how that impacts this very, very small market. There are things that we can do at a national level. And this is where we hope that the Editors Forum will lead in terms of potential interventions. But there are certain issues that we can only deal with at a regional level, especially when it comes to issues around big tech and regulation of big tech. So let me leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Herbert, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah,
Or comment?
yes, thank you so much, Owen. And thank you so much to everyone for the wonderful presentation so far. As I was listening in, the issue that I want to get back to again is the issue around surveillance. I'm going to say this because from a previous webinar that we had with one of the countries, one of the things that came through from, I can't remember the name of the gentleman, but he's a senior professional in that country and is working or was working for a media advocacy organization. And when it came to the issue of surveillance, so he's in an organization or he was in an organization that's supposed to be training or maybe speaking to the newsroom practitioners, the media practitioners about surveillance and maybe even trying to assist with ways to detect and to avoid, to mitigate surveillance. But he frankly said, and there was an open admission to say, I cannot say anything to the newsroom, to the journalists, because I myself have no capacity to know if I'm being surveilled. I have no capacity to pick that up. I want to bring that up to Namibia as well, to say, to ask again to any of you to say, is this an issue? Have you done any research around that? Would you comfortably say that the journalists, the editorial, they are clued up in terms of surveillance, in terms of how to detect if their devices under surveillance have been infected or that sort of thing? Is it something that you have been involved in trying to capacitate journalists? Would you confidently say that they are clued up? They would know if their devices are infected in one way, shape, form, or the other. Thank you.
Maybe before the panelists or anyone on the platform answers that, we also have a hand from Percy. Percy, would you like to make your contribution?
Contribution would be, I just want to, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I wanted to say something before I ask my question. I don't know, maybe it might not be relevant to this platform, but I think I've never had answers wherever I've asked these questions in the region. Evidence show that South Africa made freedom a priority because it was a direct and primary tool of the pressure system they were fighting. The new constitution was conscious, made a conscious effort to dismantle that system. For Namibia, the struggle not only involved an external enemy, but also managing internal divisions and layers of silence about events in exile. This might have created a different set of priorities and challenges for post-independence governance and transparency. So I wanted to ask the following question. That's my analysis of Namibia compared to South Africa and how the media space has developed after independence. My question would be, I don't know whether it can be answered here. How did the leadership styles and organization structures, the ANC and SWAPO, differ during their respective liberation struggles, and how this might have affected their post-independence governance philosophy? And the second question would be, what was the specific legal and constitutional framework for media and information access established in Namibia at independence? How has that been tested or changed since? Thank you.
Thank you, Percy, for your contribution. I see, Esther, you want to contribute. Before you do that, there is from NMT, but I think that's Zoe, right? She says here, I think, and I think this is in response to Herbert's question on journalists' capacity to know that they are being surveilled and so forth. I think she says, I think that is precisely the problem. Most journalists do not have the technical or institutional capacity to know whether they are being surveilled. So the absence of evidence of surveillance should not be treated as evidence of absence. From a newsroom perspective, the practical issue is uncertainty. If journalists and sources know communications data are retained and potentially accessible, but have no way of knowing when surveillance occurs or what safeguards apply, that uncertainty itself affects source protection and trust. The answer is not to tell journalists to assume they are under surveillance. The answer is to strengthen the legal safeguards around interception, require independent oversight, judicial authorization, improve transparency, and ensure meaningful source protection. Thank you so much for that response. Esther, you can go ahead.
Yeah, first I wanted to address the issue about surveillance. I think Zoe is correctly to say that most of the journalists, and including myself, we're not aware because we do not have evidence that it is being done, but I can't always just let my guards down and think that it's okay, that it's not happening. But deep down in my heart, I do believe it's happening. The second issue, it's to do with Percy's question around SWAPO and ANC post-independence and the media setup. Right after independence, I think the Liberation War veterans at the time, I think, understood the power of the media. At the time when we had the minister, Hidipo Mutenya, he's the one that was part of the transformation of the SWABC, the SWABC. Yeah, SWABC, it's not the SABC. Okay, the SWABC into the NBC. And then he was also instrumental with the setting up of the state-owned newspaper, which is the New Era, as well as the news agency NAMPA. But at the time, he was sure, if you look at the documentation or the conversation as to how he came about with these ideas, it's because he understood information and the power of information. However, over the years, when ministers have been changing, we have noticed that the information or these media houses, the state started interfering into their work, where we saw, especially with the NBC first, that they remove radio programs where the community or the people could call in. It used to be called Open Line. On radio, it was removed. And then later on, the investigative television program, which was similar to the to Carte Blanche almost. On NBC TV, it was also removed. They tried to revive it recently, but it was not in the same format. It was more into community journalism or community reporting, and those were removed. And over the years, we've also seen how the news agency NAMPA, because we've seen the fall of news agencies all over Africa, but NAMPA still remain one of the platforms where newsrooms can go to, for especially for radio news and for regional news, because not everybody is everywhere in the country. But when NAMPA is now also has turned into a PR mouthpiece for government, and the same has happened now to the NBC, where you can literally see when you are at an event together, different journalists at the event where a minister or the president is speaking, the independent media houses will come back with a different story than what the New Era or NAMPA or NBC will report on. And then you wonder exactly, were we at the same event, or didn't we just speak to the same people at the same time? But you can see the censoring of information. And one would also notice in the way how the current, especially after the passing of the late Hage Geingob, because Hage Geingob actually tried to get the ministers and everybody else again to speak to the media. He literally even gave them cell phones and commanded them to set up Twitter accounts, to have social media, Facebook accounts and Instagram accounts, especially Twitter and Facebook. They all started having those platforms and they would communicate. But all these platforms have now again turned into more event-based, more PR pieces, and you don't have access to real information. And the moment you ask for documentation on issues like Sirika Pia just has mentioned, it becomes a whole, you have to wait for like almost up to 2 weeks to get information out of the people. And if you do, you get a line or two as a response to 6 questions that you have sent out there. The other thing that we have also noticed of late is that our leaders are not accessible face-to-face. They prefer that the questions be emailed to them or the questions be sent via WhatsApp to them. They do not, they're not really readily available for a sit-down interview, and in the other places, they only want to speak once they are reading from a speech, and that's it. If you try and ambush them literally as a journalist to ask a question, we have noticed what happened to Jemima Biekes, who was chucked out of State House beginning of the year, when she just, because we've been trying to get answers from the president, and it was just not forthcoming. So coming to the issue also, the presidency at the moment, very not media friendly, very difficult to access. At the moment, we are just all having to send questions via WhatsApp or via email to State House to be able to get answers from our president. She hasn't had a media conference ever since she took office. So we hope that one day soon she will have that event.
Thank you, Esther, for your contribution. Very welcome. Maybe we want to round up, but I want to give an opportunity to the ombudsman to speak to us, to get their opinion on this report, and also on the media issues affecting Namibia. Thereafter, I'll just ask the panelists to round up and giving us the way forward, what we need to do, and also maybe where identify possible areas for partnerships with Interwatch. Where can Interwatch come in? Where can Interwatch assist? Is there room for collaboration? Is there room for joint trainings? Is there room for joint advocacy and so forth? Where do you see Interwatch coming in and so forth? And what are the priorities? What are the areas of advocacy? What should be done? How can these issues be addressed? Ombudsman, may you kindly share your thoughts?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, how are you?
Oh, we're very well, and thank you so much for joining this platform. We're honored to have you here.
Okay, and unfortunately, I have joined a little bit late. And based on your question, I did not read the report yet. I still have to go through the report. I was just chatting with someone and informing them that, I'll have a very nice weekend so that I can go through the report, familiarize myself with the content, and also the discussion that took place, at this specific, webinar. Another thing is that many of the issues that, various presenters and people who have contributed to the discussions are things that, my office that have observed. And therefore, I think I'm not really today in a good position, to give a thorough comment based on the report because I did not go through it. I have to familiarize myself with it. Otherwise, I have enjoyed what I have found people discussing. The other presentations, I did not listen to them. I hope, the event is also recorded so that I'll be able to listen to the first part of the discussion. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much, Doctor. Yes, the conversation is recorded, so and to be uploaded on the Interwatch website, and also on that platform you find the reports from other countries, 6 other countries where such research was done and webinars were held. That's Mozambique, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Eswatini, and Lesotho. So you find those reports there, and yeah, you can go through those as well just to see where Namibia stands in comparison to other countries in the region and so forth. Thank you so much. Then there was a question from, before I ask the panelists and Dr. Santos to round up, from Mapula. She's basically saying when Shelley was presenting, she mentioned monthly meetings with the state minister and editors. The same thing is reportedly happening here in Botswana. I want to find out from journalists from other countries present here if this is the same issue in your countries, and should journalists be worried if editors are engaging in such meetings with state presidency every other month? Well, in Zimbabwe, it's not happening, certainly. The president sometimes meets editors, but they tend to be handpicked, and it's mostly editors from the state media or those that are so-called compliant and so forth. Yeah, I don't know other countries, so you can maybe just answer Mapula inbox. Yeah. I would want us to round up unless someone has got a burning question. If there's a burning question, or burning comment, you can just raise your hand as we go, or just write your question and I'll be able to read it out. I want to start with Dr. Santos. Given what is happening, Namibia, no doubt, is in a better place than many other countries in the region. Certainly, that's what I felt when I read your report and when I saw the evidence of what's happening on the ground. But there are threats, there are laws that can potentially be abused, including surveillance laws and some colonial era laws and so forth. Given this, what needs to happen? Where do you think journalists, those that are involved in advocacy, what action can they take? And also, where can Interwatch come in? Maybe partnerships, training, advocacy, and so forth. Dr. Santos?
Okay, thank you, Owen. Apart from a free media, largely free media environment in the country, I think Namibia is also highly distinguished in terms of its very active civic society. I mean, we can list a number of such civic society organizations which have been doing and continue to do a lot of very important work. NMT, First Media, which is closed now. You also have DW Academy, which is mostly involved in training activities and so on and so on. It's a very key civic society organizations which play a key role in the media space in terms of identifying potential threats in bills that are being tabled in Parliament for consideration, for enactment, and they highlight those aspects in the law which pose present or future threats to the operation of the media and also to the condition of democracy in general in Namibia. So I think one way of keeping that kind of work going is to capacitate financially and technically these kinds of organizations so that they keep adding to that critical voice which contributes to expanding the range of ideas around how best to sustain democracy or even improve it in Namibia. So definitely organizations like that, I think, following the Russian-Ukrainian war, which diverted resources from erstwhile benefactors to that particular conflict, these organizations have largely been affected by funding issues. We also know that when the Trump administration took over in his second term, there was also significant slashing of funding to civic organizations that are doing a range of good work in the global south in particular, and more so in the media space. So there is a serious gap in resources in these kinds of organizations as much as there is in the media itself, as was highlighted by our colleagues today. Secondly, there might be need also to have workshops. I don't know how practical this is. This may not be one of the easiest things in Africa, but probably would be much easier in Namibia, more than any other country on the continent, to engage parliamentarians themselves and capacitate them in terms of thinking about how best to reinforce democratic institutions, systems, processes, and also accelerate the promulgation of laws that enhance and protect democracy in the country. But listening to Zoe's contribution earlier on, in fact, not just Zoe, but I think one or two other colleagues, there also seems to be apprehension about political will that it may be lacking in terms of getting some of these processes going, or some of these interventions achieved within certain time frames. I don't know. Political will is a very difficult problem to deal with. But also, the good thing with democratic spaces is that they create platforms where engagement and advocacy can actually lead to specific outcomes. But it takes me back to my earlier point that those who drive such advocacy must then have the capacity to do so and need the kind of support that I highlighted earlier on for them to be able to keep that work going. So yeah, definitely Intel Watch would be a very useful partner for the civic society in Namibia. But also, I mean, I think also, as has already been highlighted, investigative journalism is really undermined by lack of resources and also lack of qualified or experienced journalists in that space. The good news is that here at NAST, in our honors program, we're introducing investigative journalism as a standalone course, so that we create at least the foundation for professional development in that area, which can then be enhanced once the graduates enter the newsroom by their own peers who have been doing it for several years. But that would be the beginning. Also, capacitation of training institutions in terms of providing the human resource, qualified and skilled human resource in that particular area. So that's very important. But you know, media institutions themselves need resources to fund stories of that nature because of the traveling that's needed, the difficulty that they may encounter in accessing information when working on investigative stories and so on. There's always a challenge there, which would be definitely be lightened with more resources at their disposal. Then I think with regards to the experiences of women, again, it's a difficult challenge to deal with. From the contributions of the colleagues, I think we are already witnessing good developments with the entrance of a significant number of women in managerial positions within the media. But we still have challenges when it comes to the social aspect of misogynism, because that is a social-wide problem which cannot be solved by what is changing in the newsroom itself, but what needs to change in society. And that one is also an even bigger problem because it cannot be solved within the borders of Namibia alone, because men in general and boys are exposed to all kinds of misogynist content which is circulating online. And this may inform how they interact with female journalists, both as audiences and also as news sources or newsmakers. So that's also a challenge. I don't know how best that can be addressed, but it's a big problem as far as I'm concerned. So the other thing is to recognize that democracy itself is not there's no destination called democracy. It's always something that is in a state of renewal. It has to be continuously renewed by constant struggle against potential threats. So threats are never going to be eliminated. It's about how best to approach them and maximize on every opportunity to enhance processes and systems that enhance democracy itself in turn. So this particular intervention, just publishing a report that highlights these threats, is just the beginning of several processes that have to unfold to keep all the elements of a democracy in balance and get that going for as long as it is possible. Because, as I said earlier on, once the political environment degenerates into something worse than a democracy, everything else will follow suit. So the idea is to guard against that degeneration in as much as is possible. And the media is a very key institution in that process. I think that brief rambling does it for now. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Esther to speak. Then from Esther, we'll go to Zoe and to round up with Toivo. And as you speak, please try also to address this question that came to my inbox from a young female journalist. She says, I understand some challenges young women face moving from university into the newsroom. And I'd love to learn how one can connect with groups or platforms in Namibia that advocate for fair treatment of young women in newsrooms. Perhaps Esther and Zoe, you can be of assistance when you speak. Esther, can you round up and tell us maybe, and also highlight maybe areas of possible collaboration on and what needs to be done? Yeah.
Okay. So from my side, I wanted to thank Dr. Santos for this report. And I could clearly see that as journalists, we have contributed quite a lot to this report as well, because when I look at the footnotes, there's a lot of reference to the work that we have done at the Namibian especially, and also the Namibian Sun. And one could clearly see that we are on the right path, if I may say. With regards to young female journalists coming to newsrooms, look, the one thing is that we don't really have a advocacy group, but the union, which Shelleygan is leading now, because I was part of the union, is one platform that young journalists can participate, can affiliate with. They do already have a platform or a branches, or they've been encouraging for student registration or affiliation. So try and link up with the union, and the union does quite a lot of advocacy work around women protection and so on in the newsrooms and so on. It's not just labor issues, and it's also not the issues that faces every other journalist throughout, but they do advocate for certain things. I also want to just mention something around the report that I think collaboration with Intel. The one thing is that I want to emphasize the issue around regional journalists in the country, because they tend to be forgotten. Their existence tends to be forgotten because in most cases they are working in isolation out there. I know the NMT group or the foundation has really been working hard to include regional journalists in trainings that they have been offering, and I applaud them for that. It's just, I think the one thing that needs to happen is to actually go out to the regions and to go and experience, or to go and see what these journalists are going through. It's also the same challenge that I'm putting to Dr. Santos, that the students should be sent out to the regions to go and do their internships there, because doing an internship in the newsroom in Windhoek, you don't really get much because everybody is quite busy and running around. Dr. Santos, that's for you to encourage the young people to go out there. So Intel, in the future, I think, please reach out. Let's do more work. Let's not just stop here. And especially around training and also safety, especially the safety of journalists and how journalists can look after themselves. And the issue around surveillance also, because we didn't really fully explore that matter, but I think in future that's one thing that I would want the Intel Watch to see how they can assist us here in Namibia, and and especially training for journalists and how they can just do their work knowing that they are doing the right thing without that fear, or if they fear, that they know how to look after themselves.
Thank you, Esther. Zoe has shared the report that she was speaking about on this platform. Here, the Africa Media Barometer Namibia 2026 report. So I want to encourage colleagues to have a look at this report, which provides additional insights into the state of the media in Namibia. So there's a link there. You can actually click on it and read. Interwatch has also shared for the threats to the Namibia report. So just go through it so that you have a better appreciation of what we are talking about. Yeah, Zoe, may you kindly take over?
Yeah, thank you, Owen. I just wanted to go back to something Professor Santos mentioned right at the start of his intervention around the issue of political will. I'd not like to just throw out a blanket statement like that. I think we need to interrogate it with a little more nuance. I think what is important for us to realize or interrogate is the fact that the state political parties are also fragmented, are also dealing with issues of sustainability and of public trust. And as a result, I mean, many things coming from that, but as a result, I don't think that advancing the democratic agenda is that high up on their list of things to do. But then coming back to today's discussion, it's known that Namibia has always ranked very highly in terms of press freedom. Perhaps a question we should leave with is not simply whether journalists in Namibia are free to report. I think it is whether we are building a media system in which independent journalism remains possible. Because media freedom is not only lost when a journalist is arrested or a newsroom is censored, it is also weakened when a journalist cannot protect a source, when an editor begins to self-censor, and when experienced journalists have to leave because the profession is just no longer sustainable. And when public media cannot operate independently, this means, and increasingly means now, that entire communities disappear from our news agenda because covering them is just too expensive. And then this is where Prof. Kruger's concept of news deserts come in. I think Namibia still has significant democratic space, and that gives us an opportunity. And we need to use that space now before it's too late to build stronger institutions and stronger protections for sustainable journalism. Thank you for that question about Intel Watch's interventions. I've made my list. So yeah, yeah, here you go. I think my priorities would be digital safety and source protection, and linked to advocacy on surveillance and data protection. Then legal advocacy and policy advocacy, particularly around access to information, implementation, restrictive laws, and institutional independence. And when it comes to ATI implementation, our government has spent resources on, installing information officers in all ministries. But I don't think that we have really closely looked at the infrastructure that this would require for the most rural communities, in terms of, enforcing or their right to access to information. So let's look at a homegrown solution to deal with the issue of access to information, because access to information depends on push and pull factors. There must be a demand. It's demand driven. So hopefully, when it does become operational, we will all be standing with our list of access to information requests. Then after that, it's the matter of newsroom resilience, including support for editors and institutional systems, not only to individual journalists. We have to look at transformation in the newsroom, the kind of leadership that we are developing and enabling. Then to the issue of the safety of journalists, especially gendered online harassment, and then media sustainability, because shrinking revenues, job losses, newsroom juniorization are increasingly affecting independent journalism. I think the key is to connect training and advocacy, training with advocacy, and institutional reform. Strengthening journalists alone is not enough. We need to have an ecosystem-wide approach. Thanks, Owen.
Thank you so much, Zoe. This is much appreciated. My brother Toivo, may you wrap up? Which areas can we collaborate, and what are the priority areas and so forth?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, my brother. Look, I think Zoe summed it up nicely in areas of collaboration. I don't want to reinvent the wheel there. The only thing that I wanted to say really in conclusion is that they say context matters. So what may be considered as a threat to media freedom in Zimbabwe may not exactly be the same as here. The severity might be different. I mean, in Namibia, we talk about how not a single journalist has been thrown in jail for 36 years of our independence as one of the highlights of our press freedom here, which is okay. But press freedom doesn't just manifest itself, or threat to press freedom does not only manifest itself through throwing journalists in jail or shutting down a media house, like we have seen in Uganda recently and whatnot. So even in an environment where we are deemed to be free, our threats continue to exist, but perhaps just in a different format. So, for example, if sources are afraid to speak to us because of the cyber laws that we have, cybercrime laws, and the Communications Act that allows for tapping of phone calls, for example, that is a threat. If editors are afraid to take on particular stories because maybe it involves one of their key advertisers, that is a threat to independence of journalism. If government information is only accessible to particular media houses, I mean, it has been alluded to where exclusive government news is maybe leaked on purpose, not leaked even, but it's handed over for the state media to break it, or that a news conference cannot take place until the state media has arrived. Those kind of things are a threat. And if women journalists are leaving online space because of abuse, because of threats by even ordinary citizens, that also becomes a threat to journalism. So in Namibia, we must just be on alert. As editors, we will continue to advocate for a leadership team that is aware of these subtle threats as opposed to conventional ones that we have come to know over the years, so that we plug the holes as they exist. Otherwise, I'm thankful, and thank you, Owen, and your team at Intel Watch for making this conversation happen.
Thank you very much, Comrade Editor. And I want to thank all of you. I know, Zoe, you are terribly busy. I know you're in demand throughout the continent, and for you to take time, more than 1 hour, 30 minutes to be with us here, Ish, I can only say thank you for this commitment and the wonderful work that you're doing, advocating for media freedom, not only in Namibia, but across the continent. Toivo, I know it's your, you might not know this, but I know it's your deadline day. I know you're on deadline. And I appreciate you leaving everything to join us here. Esther, I know, investigative journalists are always busy, and for you to take time to be with us today, we don't take that lightly. Um, uh, Even the academics, for you to agree to do this report, take time on it, and also take part in this webinar, was so grateful. Shelley had to run because she was committed, but she still gave us a good hour to contribute, to listen, and so forth. We really appreciate. And I want to appreciate all the colleagues that took time to be with us today. Those who asked questions, those who were listening in, those who raised their hands. You know, your time is valuable, and we really appreciate it. And the Ombudsman, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We know you are also terribly busy. And we had colleagues from Botswana, Mapula from Botswana. We had Estacio from Mozambique joining, although he's under pressure. He's under pressure from the government, his phones, everything seized. He can't even function normally as a journalist because the tools that he's working with have been taken by the government and so forth. So my brother Estacio, we are there in solidarity, and you get through this and keep pushing. Tracy, it was nice for you to be here, and we're sorry for what you went through, but we're happy that you're soldiering on in the media space. So, colleagues, thank you so much. We hope we'll collaborate some more. As you know, I think last year, Interwatch was in Namibia conducting training on cybersecurity issues and so forth. Herbert was there. There were a team of experts which we brought in there to help train. And before that, we had another workshop in South Africa where some Namibian journalists also took part. And from what we spoke about here, there's need for more collaboration, more training around those issues. And I'm happy that my executive director was listening in, and the board was listening in as well. And they had they had Namibian journalists speaking for themselves around the areas that they might want collaboration, training, and so forth. So I wouldn't want this to be a once-off thing. We hope it can lead to better collaboration and empowerment of journalists. But overall, my honest opinion, I'm very happy. This is the last webinar in the 7 countries that we've done. So Namibia was the 7th. And everywhere else, there were huge problems. Like where I am in Zimbabwe, we have journalists that can't even come back home, who are in UK, who are in Zimbabwe, simply because they wrote stories. We've had editors being arrested, spending months in jail without trial and so forth. In Mozambique, journalists are being killed and there's impunity. You get killed and there's nothing happening. It's the same in Lesotho. Journalists are being shot, and so forth. So we don't take lightly what is happening in Namibia, and we recognize the gains that Namibia has, but we're also worried that things can go wrong. So there's need to consolidate. There's need to look at the potential threats and take action while we can, so that you continue to improve the media freedom and so forth. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope it has been worthwhile. Thank you so much, colleagues, and we'll meet on other platforms. Cheers.